Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to open this panel today, Beyond 2030, the Future of Social Development in a Changing World. This event is organized jointly by the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development and the Albert Hirschman Centre of Democracy of the Geneva Graduate Institute. So to opening the session today, we will have the welcoming remark of first Marie-Laura Salz, the director of the Graduate Institute, and then Asita Berar Awad, the board chair of UNRISD. Please, well, you're at home, so you are welcoming us.
Good evening to everybody, to all of you. Dear Madalena, thank you. Dear Ms. Berhard Awad, welcome, Your Excellencies, dear students, dear colleagues, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. It's really a pleasure for me to welcome you tonight at the Institute in the Maison de la Paix. I'm very happy to be able to say a few words of introduction to this public event launching the consultation process on the strategy 2026-2030 of the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development. And I would like really to thank both of you, Madalena and Ms. Berhard, for allowing me to say a few words today. It's probably not completely by chance that this event is organized today here at the Institute. UNRISD is an autonomous research institute within the UN system that undertakes interdisciplinary research and policy analysis on the social dimensions of contemporary development issues. And your objective for the strategy, if I understand correctly, is to ensure that your research remains impactful and aligns with global efforts to accelerate progress on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainability. It's worth underscoring how aligned your priorities are with our own at the Institute. Our mission is, I quote, to produce and share academic knowledge and expertise on international relations, development issues, global challenges and governance, and to nurture students and professionals to become decision makers open to the world through a combination of scientific excellence, transdisciplinarity, and critical thinking. And our vision is to foster the understanding and engagement that are essential to a peaceful, equitable, and sustainable world. So a lot of words resonate, I think, between your project and your strategy and our vision and mission. Transdisciplinarity, the critical thinking that comes with serious research and academic work, an integrated perspective where peace, sustainability, and justice are tightly interconnected, but also a constructive projection towards creative new solutions that are adapted to the challenges of today, are clearly common features of our two institutions. And I would like to say how delighted we are at the Institute with this resonance, which becomes material, very material, when our students intern with you or even join the organization. I'm also very happy to learn that our students are being involved in those discussions, in your discussions on your strategy, and are providing their own perspective on what they see as key priorities for social developments. And here I would like to take the opportunity to thank my colleagues in the Albert Hirschman Centre on Democracy, Christine, Razi, and Bala, for having coordinated this work together with you and generating the production of blog entries by our students on the future of social development in a changing world. I'm very much looking forward to seeing some of those blog entries. I often say, and this is profoundly genuine, that I'm impressed by our students, by their willingness to engage and to be the change they want to see in the world. With more than 110 nationalities present on our campus, the Geneva Graduate Institute is an impressive laboratory, an intellectual and action beehive where a new generation coming from all corners of the world prepares itself for its future role and future responsibilities, sharing the common objective of bringing back some balance to a world that is deeply and dangerously unhinged. Our world is in crisis. I guess you hear that every day. This crisis is made more acute by the dynamics on the other side of the Atlantic, but it is really important to acknowledge that the crisis we experience has been in the making for many years, and that the Trump moment is more a consequence than a cause. The way in which I like to describe a contemporary crisis is as a crisis of multidimensional disconnections. First, we are disconnected from each other. And this disconnection from each other takes itself a multiplicity of forms. It takes the form of polarization. It takes the form of acute individualism and structural loneliness. It takes the form of fear and hate of the other, whoever the other is, and the stranger, of those who appear or are construed to be as different. And this can even be our closest neighbors, by the way. What are the deep dynamics here? I would argue that we need to look at the ways in which a violent competitive capitalism has, through time, exacerbated an individualist definition of success as personal greed, has produced vast inequalities and structural separation, a sense of fragility, of fear of the future, but also resentment for many across the world. And we know since Hannah Arendt that fear and resentment are the perfect soil for the type of manipulated hate and isolation that authoritarian regimes thrive on. At a more macro level, and since we are in Geneva, it is important to underscore that this disconnection from each other plays out at the level of a multilateral system. Multilateralism is at risk. We may, in fact, be witnessing the disintegration of a system of international collaboration that was built on and from the 1945 balance of power and essentially corresponded to an American century. Perhaps, after all, that is for the better, because the multilateral architecture that came with it was showing major cracks for already quite some time. First, this system had never adapted to the profound transformation of the geopolitical balance of power. Second, it was not fit to deal with the kinds of existential common challenges that we are having to face today. Think only of climate change or technology. Third, multilateralism as we know it has been significantly delegitimized through what became, over the last decades, an increasingly visible pattern of double standards. Finally, the cracks are also coming from within. The multilateral architecture associated with the American century has repeatedly shown that it is wanting when it comes to efficiency and effectiveness. Let us say, though, that the unraveling of international connections and collaborations is not what we should aim for and hope for. Yes, change is very much needed, but let's work together so that we transform our international rule of law, our international system, and not let it die. Because if it dies, what remains then is anomie and the Obasian fight of all against all, the rule of brute force over the rule of law. And some countries obviously are, trying to push us in that direction. Another hugely important disconnection is the disconnection from our planet and from nature. We have already crossed 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries, and in particular, we are well beyond balance on climate change, biosphere integrity, and our land and water systems. In the process, we are essentially and at rapid speed making the Earth unlivable for future generations. And this may include generations that are already here in this room. Have we forgotten that as humans, we belong to and with our planet Earth? Humans and humus, after all, are 2 words that have the same etymology, the same root. Can we really be serious when we project our hopes onto technologies that are in fact consuming still more natural resources? And who in their right mind would really bet on the Planet B scenario, the Mars scenario, as some call it? What are the dynamics of this disconnection from nature? Again, I would propose the form of economic production and consumption that has come to define our modern and postmodern period. The best way to describe it is with the notion of extractivism without regeneration. And this clearly is where we need to act. Move away from the logic of extractivism that defines our economic and consumption system towards an economic logic of regeneration. Finally, another disconnection that I would like to underscore here is that from our own selves, our own deep nature. It is striking, for me at least, to see the kind of self-hatred that currently shapes a lot of our fascination with artificial intelligence and new technologies. Humans, as it were, are becoming, and I use the words here of Yuval Harari, a useless class. With the possible exception, Elon Musk and Peter Thiel would tell us, of a narrow tech elite living somewhere between Palo Alto and San Francisco. The project is to overcome the human and to bring about the post-human, the transhuman. This is, I would like to argue, deeply problematic and might in fact be at the heart of the profound civilizational angst that is palpable everywhere, across generation, across geographies, even across social boundaries. What if we decided to reconnect with the magical side of our humanity? What if we propose to re-enchant humanity, our creativity, our empathy, and interdependence, which throughout the long march of our species have been the key factors for resilience and survival? Our joy and laughter, our love and benevolence, the mark, to play on the words, of humankind. We are in urgent need of political imagination and radical collective action. We need new coalitions with a bold project and projection, that of urgently working in parallel on all forms of reconnection, from the reconnection with nature to the reconnection with each other, and even more profoundly, the reconnection with our deep humanity. We need, in other words, to construct and to sustain a coalition for a sustainable and just peace, which will not happen without such a multidimensional reconnection. As I have highlighted on different occasions and in different spaces, Geneva, in that respect, has a key role to play. And our two institutions, UNRISD and the Graduate Institute, are part of this community of actors that can bring forward this call for radical action and political imagination. The role that we played, those two organizations play, especially in terms of research, is key to identifying and understanding the deeper roots of current problems on the one hand, and to fostering new and creative solutions to our multidimensional disconnection on the other. Naturally, this is not enough, and we need to project such a coalition well beyond our two organizations, but also well beyond Geneva. This is not a small task, but the ambition is at par with the seriousness of the threats that are facing us. As the French philosopher Simone Weil told us just before she died in the middle of World War II, I quote her, "The future brings us nothing, gives us nothing. It is we who, to build it, must give it everything, give it our very lives." I thank you very much, and I wish you a very nice evening.
Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to all. Thank you for accepting our invitation to think forward about the future of social development as our world is going through multiple crises and turbulence, and especially at a time when some of the fundamental values of solidarity, inclusion, and equity, amongst others, are radically challenged, as was mentioned before, from several corners and under a variety of pretexts. These values are at the basis of UNRISD work. Some of you may not be familiar with the details of this work. UNRISD, for the last 61 years of its existence, as part of the International Geneva's ecosystem, has been focusing on evidence-based research to analyze, shape, push the boundaries of social development paradigms and policies. The topics of this research have obviously evolved in response to the social challenges and to the specific context in each era. What is important is that this independent research and reflection on policy alternatives is undertaken in extensive and continued partnerships over the years with academia, think tanks, and civil society in all regions of the world. This work jointly has set in motion a network and a movement for socially sustainable development with all the diversity in issues and approaches that is needed for such a global movement. I am confident that together we can make use of this broad partnership and space for policy and research dialogue to counter, with evidence, advocacy, and action, the attempts to weaken economic and social rights and gains, the overarching social contracts and institutions that govern work, education, health, environment, care economy, and so on, and to reinvent the ideal of cohesive societies based on social justice and solidarity-based multilateral cooperation. In a way, we are back to fundamentals, to prioritize and to recommit to social justice. The forthcoming World Social Summit, to be held later in the year, will be a case in point to measure the political ambition in our divided world to address and redress pervasive inequalities and social deficits across regions. I thank the Graduate Institute Centre for Democracy in co-organizing this reflection. Social crises, as we know, are all too often politically instrumentalized to undermine democracies. The response to what challenges can only be more scientific facts, debate, and dialogue to change narratives and to change action. I look forward to your ideas and reflections on the future of social development. And I am also not stranger to this house. I am proudly an alumni of the Graduate Institute.
Now we're going to go to a video message. I have the pleasure to introduce Professor Gayatri Ghosh, Professor of Economics of the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Professor Ghosh is a renowned economist and professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts Amherst with expertise in development economics. Her research examining the intersection of global economic system, inequality, and sustainable development. Gayatri, it's a pleasure to have you here. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madalena, and it's really a pleasure to be with all of you, even virtually. I have, of course, the utmost respect for UNRISD, which is really in very capable hands with Azita and Madalena, and also for the Graduate Institute in Geneva, where my daughter was also a student. So I'm really happy to be with you here. This is, I think it's already been mentioned in the excellent opening statement, this is actually a period of crisis. Somebody has said recently that, every generation thinks that it is actually on the cusp of a major global transition and crisis, but relatively few have the fortune or misfortune of actually being in one. And I think all of us in this context are in that period where we are seeing, we're on the cusp of very major transformations, and they could go in either way. I think what is immediately evident is that we are going to enter a significant global economic crisis. That goes without saying in the context of just the last few days of what we have experienced, and that what began as a trade crisis could well also become a financial crisis. I don't want to create panic. I just simply want to say that what we are going to experience now in the immediate future is many governments having to operate in crisis mode. And we have seen in the past that crisis modes tend to make governments stop thinking about social policy when they should really be thinking the other way. They should be precisely thinking fundamentally about social policy, and that the most resilient societies and economies are the ones that actually put an emphasis on social policies as development policy, something that UNRISD has championed now for many decades, and that emphasize the importance of not just social protection, but the entire range of development of society that actually makes life worth living in a way, as was so eloquently mentioned in the opening statement. But we do definitely need to make a very strong case for it now. We have to make an even stronger case than we had been making in the past, simply because the world has changed so much. And the world is going to change even if, let us say, everything gets reversed tomorrow. All the crazy tariffs get reversed, the trade wars end, the collapse of the bond markets comes to an end. Even if all of that changes, we know that it's going to be a different world, and one in which governments are less likely to be thinking about the criticality of social policy. So we need to make that very strong case, and I'm sure that definitely UNRISD will continue to be making that, but all of you in the Graduate Institute, all of you students and others who recognize the significance of this will also be able to play a very major role. So what do we need to do? I think critically, we have to emphasize that employment generation is key. And among the many failures of the previous growth model that the globe has experienced, which have led to this current crisis, definitely. In other words, it has culminated in this crisis. Among the many weaknesses has been that of employment generation. The failure to create enough decent work for people who are willing to do it, the fragility and vulnerability of more workers, and the very poor livelihoods that work generates across most of the world in most societies, including in some of the richest societies. And of course, the counterpart of that is increasing inequality. And it's very interesting that about a decade ago, inequality became a major subject of discussion and concern. And yet, after that period, it's increased even more. Just when everyone was talking about, Occupy movement and we are the 99%, and when Thomas Piketty and others were talking about inequality as this major socioeconomic concern, thereafter we have found a dramatic, massive increase in inequality, particularly the share of assets and incomes controlled by the top 10% of the globe, of the world's population, and then the 1% of the world's population. And this inequality, in turn, is adding to the desecration of our planet, to the dramatically increasing climate change, and to a whole range of other concerns that we all know about. Employment generation is key to reducing the inequality, but of course, how do we then finance the social policies, the provision of basic needs, the recognition of the rights of all people, not just citizens, but all residents, including migrants? How do we ensure that we have the fiscal balances that will enable this? Usually, whenever you say that we have to deal with any crisis by providing more protection, by ensuring that everybody has their basic needs, by generating more employment through public employment, by creating good quality employment, by paying special attention to women, whenever you say this, policymakers turn around and say, where's the money? How can we raise the resources to do this? We simply cannot afford it. That's typically what we are told. But of course, that is a political decision. And we have to drive that home continuously, that the choice of not having not enough money, that's a political choice because it means that we have not tapped the major sources of public revenue, which are the ultra-rich and the large corporations. So if, in fact, we are in our own societies and through international cooperation, able to institute a very small wealth tax on the super rich, a 2% tax on their financial assets, say, which is so small relative to, let's say, stock market fluctuations. I mean, many of these multimillionaires and billionaires have lost 10% of their assets through just a stock market fluctuation. Just taxing 2% would generate enough money to actually deal with adaptation needs across the world, the climate adaptation needs globally, for example. But there are many, many more other ways in which this money can be used. Similarly, multinational corporations and very large corporations get away with paying lower taxes than either domestic companies or small and medium enterprises because they can actually figure out ways to avoid the taxation legally by transferring a lot of their profits to tax havens, to low tax jurisdictions, claiming that it's for royalty payments or technical fees or for various other things, or interest payments, or all kinds of devices have been thought of, or by essentially using the loopholes available in tax laws to bring down their taxable profits, their taxable incomes. This can be resolved. It is actually not so difficult to do with a determined government. And particularly with global cooperation, it's possible to actually do this. If we also combine this with sin taxes for extremely carbon-emitting luxury consumption, things like private jets, things like, luxury second homes all around the world, and so on, you actually are able to generate enough resources to do the kinds of things we're talking about, the developmental spending, the climate finance, the essential money needed to ensure minimum social and economic rights for everyone on the planet. All of this can be done, it's feasible. But in addition to a global architecture that would enable this kind of progressive fiscal policy, we also have to rethink our development policy. So in a sense, the crisis that has been unleashed by the administration in the US, the Trump government, is something that actually brings home the fact that that model of export-led growth, which really thought that, all you have to do is just somehow increase your export revenues at whatever cost to your own nature, your own society, your own workers, your own pollution, etc. It's essential somehow to just increase exports. That model is now failed. It's dead in the water. We really have to have a new model. And it is, again, possible. So in a way, it's not just a wake-up call. It is now that we are being forced to get away from that export-driven model. And that gives us the freedom to develop more sustainable, more desirable models that focus on basic needs provision, on employment generation, on public services, on small and micro enterprises, and on sustainable patterns of growth. There are many, many options available, and they're necessary, not just to save the planet, but also to save our societies. Now that trade rules have been blown up completely, it is actually possible for many countries to think of ways of managing trade that encourage the development of small and micro industries, that develop the capabilities of the people, and do not expose them to extremely damaging foreign competition from very large corporations that they cannot compete with. So essentially, this is a message that we should grab. We should seize the pain that this particular crisis is necessarily going to deliver, to think of a new way of organizing our economies. And that also means to reduce external financial dependence and debt-driven growth. Again, these are things that may just result as a fallout of the crisis we face. But if they do, and if they succeed in putting all of our economies on a more sustainable, equitable, socially desirable path, then we should actually think that it's a blessing in disguise, and we should be much more positive about coping with the immediate problems that we know will come. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for finishing with this hope about the future in time of crisis and when everybody is feeling a little bit depressed. So we're going to now move on for the moment to have some opening statements from representatives of the different countries. I have the pleasure to call to the stage to the permanent representative of Chile to the United Nations office in Geneva, Claudia Fuentes Julio, to the permanent representative of Finland, Madame Heidi Skroderus Fox, to the chargé d'affaires of the permanent mission of China to UNOC, Mr. Chen Yang, and Mr. Muhammadu Ka, the permanent representative of the Gambia. I call you all to the floor. I'm going to join you from here. So we're going to start with Ambassador Scrothers Fox, then in reverse order, then with Ambassador Claudia Fuentes, and then Mr. Jen and Mr. Ka. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and quite a gender, balance on the speakers so far, I have to say. Excellencies, dear colleagues, dear students, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here this evening, and I want to really thank the United Nations Research Centre for Social Development, the Albert Hirschman Centre, the Geneva Graduate Institute, for inviting me and for organizing this very important event. The pursuit of social justice for all is really at the core of the United Nations mission. A society's resilience to challenges and crises heavily relies on social cohesion and trust. This is the only sustainable foundation for conflict prevention and for long-term peace building. This viewpoint is also reflected in the recent UNRISD global consultation for the World Summit for Social Development, where governance, political stability, inequality, and climate change were identified as major challenges to social development. Respondents highlighted governance and accountability as urgent areas for action as we build trust, ensure efficiency, promote fairness, and support societal stability. So over 30 years, the world has undergone a significant transformation, and as is very clear from the statements before me, we are right now in the midst of another major transformation, the contours of which are still cloudy. We don't know what it will bring, but it is clear that we are right in the middle of it. So while the core pillars of the 1995 Copenhagen Declaration on Social Development remain relevant, we do require to reconsider and update them. In time between the social summits of Copenhagen and Doha, we have held several summits and agreed on declarations and goals such as the Sustainable Development Goals, very important. And in times of polarization and uncertainty, I think it is vital to uphold our commitment and safeguard really effective and rules-based multilateralism. Today, the global economy is facing a complex mix of geopolitical challenges. And when navigating these uncertainties, it's good to keep in mind that effective and impactful welfare policies and structures supporting them can improve productivity, long-term economic sustainability, and also societal resilience. As for Finland, my own country, it's important that in preparation of the World Social Summit, we consider the following. First, we need to have a cross-sectoral integrated approach that involves the whole of government, and not only the whole of government, but the whole of society. And Finland is advocating for what we call is the economy of well-being approach, which stresses the mutually reinforcing aspects of economy and well-being policies. And some of you might know that Finland has been selected in I think 6th or 7th year in a row as the happiest country in the world. And I would say that, thank you, that it really is because we have a society that focuses on well-being of people and really provides opportunities for all citizens. The second important thing for us is a strong human rights basis, including strong provisions related to gender equality and the rights of women and girls, and also the most vulnerable people. I have sometimes been approached by people who tell me that, oh, Finland, you can afford to talk about gender because you are a wealthy country. I say no. We are a wealthy country because we have focused on gender. That is a very important part of our history and the fact why we are today a country that is doing relatively well. Third, the importance of investing in enabling environments, institutions, and structures in societies to empower all people to prosper. This requires boosting our governance capabilities, including fair and effective domestic resource mobilization. There was some discussion on taxes in the previous statement. We have to strive for achieving universal social protection and universal health coverage for safeguarding access to all to essential health and social services, social protection, as well as to quality education and quality housing. These are central to ending poverty, reducing inequality, and strengthening societal stability, and for securing free and diverse civil society. Social cohesion and solidarity are very much a product of civil society organizations which know and represent the interests and needs of different populations and population groups. So, ladies and gentlemen, finally, I think our obligation is really to install hope, again, in the younger generation for your future, their future, and the future of the world. We must encourage youth to act and support them with policies and structures to actively participate in societal development. Quality education is absolutely key in building sustainable future. It transforms not only individual lives, but also societies at large. Thank you.
Ambassador Fuentes, I invite you to take the floor.
Dear colleagues, friends, professors, and especially students that are here this evening with us, let me begin by thanking the Graduate Institute, the Albert Hirschman Centre for Democracy, and the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, and especially its director, Magdalena Sepúlveda, for the opportunity to contribute to this timely conversation on the future of social development. For Chile, a middle-income country of Latin America, as you know, this dialogue is a matter of shared responsibility. Despite 30 years of efforts made after the convening of the first World Summit for Social Development in Copenhagen, progress in this sphere has been slow and uneven. The commitment we made to advance 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development remained also unfulfilled, and significant gap persists as well. Let me give you a gap. I always start with some data to showcase this. Almost 60% of the global population is concerned about losing their job or not finding one. Informal employment remained as pervasive as ever. 3.8 billion people lack any kind of social safety net, including 1.8 billion children worldwide. And next is one that is really one that frustrates me, because I'm the chair of Alliance 8.7, which is the Alliance Against Child Labor. At the moment, we have 160 million children in this situation, in child labor. Despite the challenges, we believe that progress and change is possible. Chile advocates for a development model that champions economic, social, and environmental policies that are coherent and mutually reinforcing, and that puts people and social justice at the center of our policy concerns. Development for us is not simply about managing resources. It's about ensuring justice and building societies where we can live in dignity. We strongly support the emerging concept of human rights economies, as advanced within the Human Rights Council, which places dignity and rights at the core of fiscal, economic, and social policies. Our commitment to building a well-being economy aligns with this vision, and with the Summit of the Future call to move beyond GDP as the primary metric of progress, prioritizing human well-being and planetary sustainability. In the fiscal arena, Chile supports the process toward a UN Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation, aimed at tackling tax evasion and ensuring sufficient and equitable public financing for human rights. Additionally, the fourth International Conference on Financing for Development that is taking place in Spain in June will offer a vital space to address financial gaps, particularly for middle-income countries. Given this context, Chile sees three key priorities that should shape our regional and global dialogue on social development. First, the urgent need to consolidate universal, sustainable, and right-based social protection systems, capable of withstanding future shocks, economic, climate, and, of course, technological issues, all of them grounded in equity and inclusion. Here, and in accordance with our feminist policies, I would like to stress that it's key to take comprehensive measures to achieve gender equality and empowerment of women and girls, both as a prerequisite and as a goal of sustainable development. Chile encouraged women-led development and reiterated commitment to enhancing women's full, equal, and meaningful participation as decision makers for addressing global and national challenges as well. Second, the strengthening of public institutions and democratic legitimacy. Social development is not possible without trust, accountability, and meaningful social participation. Where institutions are captured, weakened, or bypassed, rights are at risk, and people lose faith in democracy. Third, the reaffirmation of a truly inclusive and effective multilateralism, one that not only respects but actively embraces the diversity of development paths, priorities, and capacities of different countries, one that strongly believes in the UN Charter and the effective realization of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a multilateralism based on common values and norms that are based on our common humanity. For multilateralism to be more effective, knowledge and empirical evidence research is crucial. And this is the part where students, universities, and all of us come inside. We need more work with the UN system and academic institutions to generate evidence-based policies and strengthening our decision-making processes and policy coherence at the domestic and international level. Let me finish saying that looking beyond 2030, we must forge a new social and ecological contract, placing economic, social rights on equal footing with civil and political rights. Development must be measured not just in growth, but in dignity, equity, and care. The latter is indispensable to achieve and maintain peace within and across nations. The upcoming World Social Summit in Doha is an important milestone. In times of uncertainty and political turmoil, it is critical to build trust, promote social dialogue, search for innovative solutions, and renew our commitment to multilateralism and international cooperation, always grounded on equality and dignity for all. Thank you.
Ambassador Chen Yang.
Thank you, Madeleine, and thank the dear panelists. And it seems that we are on the panel, in the same panel every day. Yesterday we were in the panel for women's in the science and technology in GSTD, and I was with Ambassador Kang just now on the G77 discussions with the president. I am first thank UNRISD and also the Graduate Institute for the invitation. This is a very important event, and I'm very glad to participate. My function, mostly as Chargé d'Affaires of the Permanent Mission of China, and I have another title is Ambassador for Disarmament Affairs of China. So my function usually focus on security and disarmament. And nowadays, I participate more and more in UNRISD activities, on social and development activities. There is genuine connections between the two. The more I participated in social and development events, the more the stronger impression I have. Actually, it's a disarmament for the relationship between disarmament and development, always there. Unfortunately, as colleagues and panelists just mentioned, we are right now in the crisis. My understanding is that there are tensions, geopolitical tensions, and there are increasing trend of arms race. So there are more fundings for military budget and less funding for development. That's very sad. That's a geopolitical reality. And so we still need to work in that direction. And my function as a disarmament ambassador should still play for further the disarmament process and to prevent arms race and to allocate more fundings for development. As Professor Gosch just mentioned, where is the money? I think the money is spent to a certain extent in the military part, but it should be spent in the development, in the social welfares. And coming back to the topic of today, we are in a changing world and we are in a crisis, and that's true, and we are facing multiple challenges. The uncertainty, instability, and unpredictability of the world are rising significantly. And the theme of today's event, Beyond 2030, the future of social development in a changing world. I was wondering what will be beyond 2025, or even what will be beyond the next month. Every day is changing, and there are breaking news every day. There are measures putting up even every hour. So multilateral organizations and institutions are facing political and financial pressures, with those in development sector being particularly affected. Recently, as you all followed very closely, the United States has, under various excuses, imposed arbitrary tariffs on all its trading partners. This has seriously infringed upon the legitimate rights and interests of other countries, severely disrupted the stability of the global economic order, and brought nothing but harm to the global development agenda. Professor Gosch just mentioned that right now it's trade crisis. It might turn into financial crisis. I'm thinking that even more pessimistically, whether it will turn into security crisis. This is very, I think it's very, very serious and very serious crisis we are facing. In this context, we need to reflect on how to navigate these turbulent times and move ahead, achieving more inclusive, equitable, and resilient development for a better future. I believe the three key points are essential. First, we must uphold solidarity and cooperation. Global progress towards sustainable development goals has fallen short of expectation. The international community must embrace true multilateralism, move beyond narrow geopolitical interests, and translate the spirit of multilateralism into concrete actions, putting the 2030 agenda back on course. Secondly, we must prioritize development. Development issues should be at the center of international agenda. There must be increased investment in critical areas such as poverty reduction, food security, infrastructure, climate change mitigation, and in developing countries. Developed countries must fulfill their commitments on official development assistance and climate financing, helping developing nations better address various risks and challenges. Ambassador Khan and I just were in the discussions with the president of UNCTAD 16 conference, and I think the concerns were raised from G77, the lack of funding, the financing for development, and these issues need to be duly addressed. we need to fully leverage the role of emerging technologies in promoting development and ensure the inclusive sharing of technology dividends for all. And yesterday, Ambassador Kang also chairing the CSDD, and which exemplifies what technology and what digital technology, artificial intelligence, can contribute to the development cause. And third and last, we must focus on action and implementation. Sustainable development is not just about words. It requires concrete steps. Empty promises no longer enough. Real solutions must be pursued, and all parties should accelerate the implementation of Pact for the Future, translating visionary goals into tangible actions and working towards a more just and equitable global governance system. We must also support this year's World Summit for Social Development, which will be in Spain, and prioritizing poverty reduction, full employment, and social inclusion with the aim of achieving ambitious, meaningful outcomes. Dear colleagues, development is an enduring theme for human society and key indicator of progress. The Global Development Initiative proposed by China has evolved from the cooperative idea into collective action, providing a Chinese solution to advancing the Sustainable Development Agenda. China is committed to using this initiative, the Global Development Initiative, as a platform for collaboration with all countries, all international institutions, taking concrete steps to accelerate the achievement of SDGs, contributing to the formulation of a new development approach to post-2030 era and building a community with a shared future for mankind. And I wish today's event a great success, and which will also make contributions to UNRISD a strategy for 2026 to 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Kang.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's good to be here at the Graduate Institute always. Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, fellow panelists. From the onset, I wish to express my sincere appreciation to UNRISD and the Albert Hirschman Centre, as well as the Geneva Graduate Institute, for convening this very timely and strategic dialogue on the future of social development. As my colleague mentioned, we're just coming from a long meeting with the G77 plus China on the very heart of social development and what matters to the global South in the current shifting, random, sometimes, geopolitics that we are all confronted with. It is indeed a privilege to contribute modestly to this conversation that seeks not only to assess our progress, but to chart a bolder and more inclusive course for the years beyond 2030. This is indeed a pivotal moment in our collective journey towards the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It is important to note we are now well past perhaps more than half of the mark, and yet too many of our global goals remain elusive. Inequalities are widening, the climate crisis is escalating, and we are experiencing an unprecedented, changing, and uncertain geopolitical landscape with immediate socioeconomic consequences across the world. Rising political polarization in the context of rapidly changing geopolitics and the global economic order, enveloped in huge uncertainties, and challenging the resilience and viability of our agreed rule-based multilateralism is progressively undermining global solidarity and collective commitments, particularly to development, global rule-based trading systems, and importantly, international law. And the world's most vulnerable, those our globally agreed SDGs vowed to leave no one behind, continue to hear or to receive the brunt of our collective inaction and the rapidly shifting geopolitics and resetting the global economic order. Let us be clear. The path to 2030 is not a passive one. Although it is a call to transformative change, there are rising signals that accepted commitments towards its form and centrality to development are rapidly eroding, and most member states are currently in a state of shock and ill-equipped for a fitting response to protect the slippery road and destination of the SDGs and Agenda 2030s as we know or committed to them. Excellencies and colleagues, the barriers and most pressing obstacles to social development are rising and very troubling, and I'll just name a few. One is persistent structural inequalities, which has been touched upon by my colleague panelists, rooted in race, in gender, in income, and geography that continue to shape life outcomes across generations. The second point is fragmented governance. I also had one of the panelists talked about governance and the shrinking civic space, which hinder collaboration, trust, and democratic participation. 3, also it was mentioned, the financial architecture. Actually, it was part of our conversation today at the G77 plus China. Insufficient and uneven financing with most of our countries in the global south, often forced to choose between short-term survival and long-term investment in resilience. However, alongside these key challenges are powerful levers for meaningful transformative change to enable development and prosperity. I will share also a few. Harnessing people-centric data and public digital infrastructure, digital innovation, AI, and sustainability. In the view of making them more inclusive, more people-centric, and rights-based, can enable meaningful digital transformation for development. And I see my colleagues from the ITU in the audience. We must scale access to education, to healthcare, and to enhance agricultural productivity, climate adaptation, and resilience, as well as risk mitigation and financial inclusion using these digital technologies and emerging technologies. They will ensure value creation and enhancement in productive capacities, as well as more meaningful sustainable development and prosperity. We must harness and support our youths, the creativity of our youths across our continent, Africa, and across the global south. Their leadership, because they will be the future leaders, or they are the future leadership today. Youth entrepreneurship and grassroots mobilization are pushing institutions to be more responsive, more agile, and more equitable, and more people region-centric, and more importantly, more accountable. And regional cooperation and South-South learnings are unlocking new pathways for sustainable transformation, development, and prosperity. Excellencies and colleagues, across my continent, Africa, the commitment to the 2030 agenda remains steadfast. Yet the road to sustainable and inclusive social development is impeded by persistent structural inequalities, limited fiscal space, and the compounded effects of rapidly changing geopolitics that are triggering external shocks and socioeconomic uncertainties, from climate-induced disruptions to disruptions to our rule-based trading system, to financial instability, and tensions in the global economic order and our rule-based multilateralism wrapped into a vicious cycle of debt trap that we can't get out of. These challenges continue to strain our public and multilateral institutions and deepen social and economic vulnerabilities. At the same time, we are witnessing a surge in emerging opportunities and positive trends that are transforming the development landscape with huge potentials for growth, for development, enhanced productive capacity, and prosperity. I must say that social protection schemes are being expanded and enabled by digital technologies, AI tools, and services, allowing for faster and more efficient and seamless service delivery to vulnerable populations and service delivery to citizens broadly. So the centrality of emerging technologies and digital and AI and building public digital infrastructure that is people-centric are quite important in the rejuvenation of social dynamics. Looking ahead, beyond 2030, there is a growing call across our region, across Africa, and by extension across the global South, for a renewal social contract, a social contract that is rooted in dignity, in equity, in accountability, and collective responsibility. This requires robust national innovation systems, but also meaningful international cooperation that respects our local context. Some few forward-looking trends that are worth noting. One is the green transitions, but green transitions must be just transitions. The climate adaptation and mitigation strategies must integrate equity at their core, not only to protect ecosystems, but to ensure that no community is sacrificed in the name of progress. Urbanization and demographic shifts, particularly in Africa and Asia, are reshaping societies. These are not crises, but opportunities to reimagine inclusive infrastructure, employment, and governance models. And lastly, the rise of artificial intelligence and frontier technologies demands a global ethical framework. Without it, digital divides and algorithm biases could further entrench exclusion. And if we think we are challenged by the digital divide and lack of connectivity, if we don't get our straps together, the AI divide will actually create more challenges and social havoc for us. Finally, it is important we reflect and look ahead to strengthen support and adequately resource our academic institutions, particularly universities, and strengthen the role and engagement of universities, researchers, and research institutions and centers and hubs. Research, foresight, and anticipation work leading to evidence-based policy and systems change, meaningful systems change, and transformation to guide action, meaningful action, interventions, and decision-making is essential and must be a priority. Indeed, research and evidence-based policy engagements must go hand in hand with stronger bridges between evidence and action, with stronger bridges between evidence and action and between government and civil society organizations. We must build research and policy making through co-creation to ensure that evidence is not only produced but embedded in policy cycles, budgeting, and monitoring framework. We must invest in localized knowledge systems, especially in Africa and the Global South, to ensure context-relevant, adaptive, and culturally grounded solutions. And this is the voice that we try to project at WIPO. We must embrace systems thinking in research to move beyond siloed interventions towards integrative policies that reflect the complexity of sustainable development and prosperity. So as we reimagine social development in a changing world, we must resist one-size-fits-all approaches. Let me close by saying achieving the 2030 agenda and to usher in meaningful development and prosperity with no one left behind requires not just better policies, but an efficiently structured multilateral system, bolder, rational, and reasonable politics, a politics of pragmatism, a politics of inclusion, a politics of solidarity, and a politics of shared humanity leading to growth, development, and prosperity for all. We must revive global constructive dialogue, engagement, and cooperation, even with those we may not share perspectives, but through diplomacy, meaningful, committed diplomacy, we can achieve and surmount the challenges that we are facing. We must not panic with what is happening. We must not overreact. We have to come together and have our heads above the tidal waves and make sure that the waves do not cover our head and submerge us under the water. We have to be grounded, and I thank you so much.
Excellencies, our warm thank you for your statements. You have set the floor for the next session, in which we're going to continue having a panel discussion. I invite you to we're going to change the settings. Thank you very much. While we change, we're going to hear actually the voices of some youth. We asked them to what they thought were the future of social development. And while we see the video, I would like to invite our next panelist to the stage. So please, I would like to invite Anton Leis Garcia, Janina Welp, and Bilay Yamusi to the panel.
As a future leader, I think my priority would be to include more women, especially from the marginalized communities, and get their voices on the table so that their ideas, their communities' rights, and their problems can be equally addressed by the people of the future.
My priority for the future has to be related to mobility and migration. Basically, the connection between climate change and migration has to be recognized as a source of fear and a reason for people to move.
My top priority as a future development leader would be to address the crisis that is climate change. It sounds generic, but it is the crisis of our generation, and it does need a lot of action. Now, this would be my top priority just because there's a lot of backsliding from the nations that have historically led the charge for climate change. but we then need to look at how this change can be affected from different voices from all over the world. Instead of relying on the global north, we now need to integrate global south voices a bit more into the conversation on addressing climate change, so that the developmental agenda isn't being received in the global south, it's also being generated and developed in the global south.
So I think the top priority to address is to stimulate the economic growth around the world, including both advanced economies and emerging market economies. Thank you.
As a future development leader, my top priority for the world would be like a huge demilitarization. I think that's what we need.
So, as the only UN body with the mandate to do research on social development, UNRISD has been doing this for 61 years. And this is what we do. We facilitate discussion, we bring experts, we bring different political point of view, and we ask the challenging questions of our time. So after we heard from our keynote speaker, that we heard from the distinguished ambassador for different regions, we have and heard from the students, we have now an amazing panel in which we're going to ask these difficult questions. We also are going to be joined by a fourth panelist that is going to be connected via video. I hope that you are there. I'm going to introduce the panelists before they speak. So our first panelist, Kumi, hello, you're now in the room, is Kumi Naidu, a human rights and environmental justice activist, former executive director of Greenpeace and Secretary General of Amnesty International. Kumi is a South African human rights and environmental justice activist who currently is the president of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty and the Payne Distinguished Lecturer at Stanford University. He's the former Secretary General of Amnesty International and the former executive director of Greenpeace. Kumi, can you hear us well? Yes, perfect. So you have long been a powerful voice in the intersection of climate justice, inequality, and human rights. So from your perspective, what are the most significant sources of resistance, whether political, economical, or societal, that are blocking the kind of radical transformation needed to address inequality in their roots? And I will add, we heard now from the various ambassadors before, very progressive policies they were pushing forward. So what is preventing to achieve those policies in their countries, in their regions, and globally? Kumi, you have the floor. We cannot hear you, so 1 second. You're muted.
Greetings, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly well.
Okay. So let me start by saying that the moment of history that we find ourselves in, pessimism is a luxury we simply cannot afford, and the pessimism that justifiably emerges from our analysis, our observations, and our lived experiences can, must, and should be responded to by the optimism of our thought, our actions, our creativity, our courage, and our sense of humanity. In this moment that we find ourselves in, we need to recognize that actually the chickens are coming home to roost, right? What is happening now was bound to happen at some point for the following reason. If I were to do a quick pop quiz and ask your audience now, what percentage of the global population lives in the global south? I wonder what our answers would be. So I'd ask everybody to try to think about the answer to the question, and maybe, moderator, if you can just ask the panelists quickly what their answers to the question is, just for a quick break.
You're going to put us all on the spot. So I'm going to put on the spot the panelists. Anybody would like to try the response to that? Anybody in the audience? Yes, go ahead. We have a brave participant here. 85%. Did you hear? 80 to 85%?
Yes, the person is almost correct. It's 88%. 88% of the world's population live in the global south, and if we look at it in terms of countries, then actually we are talking about at least in excess of 70% of countries are located in the global south. So then when we take the conversation we've been having of why we are not winning, is because the global governance system has been stuck in the geopolitics of 1945. While all of us fight and try to uphold the multilateral system, it's about time that we also need to say that this system has not served the majority of people on the planet, and that system needs to be fundamentally changed. And so in this moment of crisis, we need to actually be looking at how that change might actually happen. The second reason, so if we just look at the global governance system, it's suffering from a democratic deficit, a coherence deficit, a compliance deficit, by which I mean we have UN summit after UN summit where we agree things that sound very nice, and the implementation of those decisions is not even 10 or 15% most of the time. And then, of course, all of this gives us accountability and a legitimacy deficit. So that's one reason we're not winning. The second, and I want to turn to activism itself here and say that we are part of the problem. And that is what we've done, two big errors. One, if we take what the young people were saying on the video about the urgency of climate change, we have treated climate change as an environmental issue, and we then have, human rights is another silo, development and poverty is another, and so on. And so part of our problem is that we've ignored what the feminist movement urged us not to do decades ago, when they said we needed to have intersectionality. We needed to understand how different issues intersect with each other rather than trying to treat them in the silo. So that is the second and important reason, and to frame climate change as an environmental issue was a tragic failure, because climate change is about our economy, it's about our transport system, our energy system, our food system, and so on. And in that sense, we should see it as a cross-cutting issue. The third reason we are not winning as fast and big as we need to, and let's be clear, if it wasn't for activism, we would be in a much more dire strait, but activism cannot be comfortable with the idea of winning battles, important battles, but losing the overall war for social justice, gender justice, economic justice, and so on. So the third challenge is most of our messages and our narratives, right, are aimed at the brain, and we ignore the heart, the body, and the soul. Far too often, the kind of conversation we're having in this very room today, 99% of our families, friends, and relatives, right, if we went home over the weekend and they asked us what exactly it is that you do, what conferences you attended, and if we try to speak like how we speak in a conference like this, I would be surprised if many of our families and friends actually understand what we are talking about. So bottom line is we are losing the communications battle. The main reason I would say we are not winning is that we don't have people behind us in sufficient numbers. And part of what we need to do is begin to recognize that the Trumps of the world and the fascists of the world are bypassing the brain and going straight to the heart and weaponizing all sorts of hate and identity and so on. Now, I'm not suggesting that we need to do the same. I'm not suggesting that we need to lie. But we don't have to be as boring with the facts as we often are for ordinary people. So here is why one of the solutions of our time to address this challenge is to address the problem of communications. And you might have heard that there's a new movement that's emerged where we're bringing arts, culture, and activism together called the Artivism movement, where we try to reach people through music, through culture, through various different artistic disciplines and so on. To conclude, I want to conclude again on an optimistic note. Let's be blunt about it. We cannot sugarcoat the moment that we're in. None of us thought we would be in this disastrous situation where we see fascism on the rise, and we need to call it that. We need to not be hesitant. Fascism is on the rise, and you can go look at the technical definition of fascism and see what's happening. We cannot pretend that we are in a normal political situation. We need to recognize that there is abnormality that is being normalized, the racism on the rise, reversing back gender equity struggles that we won, and so on. So yes, things are really bad. But I want to end with this thought. In more than 45 years of activism, I don't remember any moment where the appetite for fundamental, structural, and systemic change, which is critically needed right now, and has been needed for a long time, is as high as it is at the moment, right? So we are often placed in a situation where we are rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic while humanity sinks, and we have to break out of that. And so I would say, yes, things are challenging, right? But we have an obligation to exercise maximum creativity, to look at this moment and see, well, what does this moment offer us in terms of changing global governance to make it more democratic and fair, changing our trading system to make it more democratic and fair, and changing our very, how negotiations happen. And I want to leave you with this thought. Think about the climate negotiations. It took us 28 years since the first one in Rio for fossil fuels to be even mentioned in a climate outcome document, when we know that fossil fuels constitutes 86% of the cause of climate change, right? So that's like Alcoholics Anonymous having conferences every year, and it takes them 28 years before they can mention alcohol in their outcome document. So I end by saying that we have to be brutally honest with ourselves. If we are failing, we must say to ourselves, we are failing, we're not winning as fast and big as we need to, and we need to be addressing the structural and systemic problems in the way activism and change happens, including following on climate change, following fossil fuels, and getting fossil fuels phased out as fast as possible. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Kumi. I'm going to turn now to Janina Welp, a research fellow at the Albert Hirschman Centre of Democracy. And Janina, I'm going to continue. So if, as Kumi said, we're failing, I think that one of the areas in which we're failing is with our democracies. So what is preventing participation, real and effective participation in our democracies, and what is sort of feeding into this polarization that we're living in, that doesn't allow the movement and the activism to really change the democratically elected government that we are seeing? I mean, in recent years, last year was the years of election, what we have is not what we expected for the crisis that we're living in. So how do you explain that?
So thanks, Magdalena, and thanks and UNRISD to co-organize this event with the Albert Hirschman Centre on Democracy. A lot has been said till now, and I guess we are also running out of time, so I will go directly to answer your question about what happens to democracy and what is exacerbating political polarization. I think the diagnosis of the problem is already on the table. Many people before me spoke about the economic dimension, but I want to mention that the economic, political, and the media ecosystem dimension. In terms of the economic dimension, the problem is capitalism evolution. I think this was mentioned before, and we can summarize it in the idea of inequalities are rising, and this is producing disillusionment, and in few words, could be said that I could say that the people feel the system is unfair. In political terms, there are many things to mention in each one of the dimensions, but I would focus on the political parties, which are at the center of the crisis of representation, distrust in institutions, and it could be summarized in the idea of no one is listening to us. And related to media ecosystem, we can talk about the spectacularization of the conversation on politics in general, and also increasing individualism. So we are talking about affective polarization. It's not, I think, the main problem, ideological polarization, which is also part of the problem, but mainly is affective polarization, defined as an emotional antagonism in which the other is defined as an enemy and not as an adversary. But at the same time, we are talking about polarization, and we should also consider disengagement, which is also part of the problem. But, and this is what I said as my main message for this first round, is that these are structural problems, but fixating on them risks paralysis, because I think we listen a lot about these very big problems, these narratives of quite dramatic and catastrophist, and I'm not saying we don't have a problem, but I think this narrative is also part of the problem. So you can ask about the alternative, what can be done, and I think the alternative is to shift from general and or abstract diagnosis indicate to rebuilding agency. And more concretely, I would like to take the Hirschmanian approach, because we are here talking on behalf of the Albert Hirschman Centre on Democracy, and look for context-specific opportunities. So even crisis can be a catalyst. And there are two aspects, at least. One is the narrative, and this was already mentioned, but just to provide an example, it's important to define problems locally. So we can talk about inequalities, but inequalities is something generic or abstract, and in a given place it's much better to talk specifically of why can't our youth afford homes here, or a job position, or studying, or because context matters a lot. And it's important to highlight achievable goals. And then we can talk also about the practices, and this was already mentioned by other speakers, and thinking the grassroots institutions and in mechanisms to reduce polarization, like shared projects, rebuild trust across divides. And of course, there are problems that need a global approach, but I think it's important also with this to define specific goals. We need less grand theory about decline and more experimentation with what works here.
Thank you very much, Janina, for that. I'm going to move to Anton Leis Garcia. Anton, you are the director of the Spanish Agency for Development Cooperation, and I mean, development cooperation has been at the center of the discussion since the new administration in the US. And so, and Spain is doing things differently. So we wanted to ask you, in your view, what are the key political and financial obstacles currently hampering truly transformative international development partnership? Not an easy question.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to UNRISD and to the Geneva Institute for organizing this. It's great to see young faces, and not that young faces, because we are not ageist here, in a place so beautifully called Maison de la Paix. And we mentioned so many crises, so many problems that we are facing. The climate crisis, that is an important one, and I agree with Kumi that we should not tackle climate as an environmental problem. It is a fundamental transition that we need to go through. But there are a series of challenges, and I think the worst of them all, hasn't been mentioned yet, is wars. We have 120 active conflicts. We have the basic principles upon which, and it's not about the international order of the last 80 years, I would say 200 years of international law, international humanitarian law, undermine, question everywhere. I don't need to mention specific examples. You all know them. We are seeing them live. So what we see globally in our societies and at global scale is a questioning of everything that unites us. Trade, cooperation, international humanitarian law, science, data, and we see it, and we see the use of social media to question all of this, all the disinformation and the fake news, that all of these elements, including now trade, that we are seeing, have been suffering. So I do not want to focus too much on the different crises that we have. I can give you figures about, more than, the number of poor people that we have in the world, inequalities widening, a number of countries still being held back by debt, by protracted crisis. By the way, not necessarily least developed countries, many middle-income countries stuck in this cycle of conflict and fragility. The climate crisis that is feeding other types of crises like mobility, human mobility, and conflicts again. Gender gaps, we are a feminist development cooperation. At the current rate, it will take us 286 years to resolve legal gaps between men and women. It's simply unacceptable, frankly. The progress is too slow, and we know that on the SDGs we are being held back. This is on the demand side. So we have, from the international cooperation perspective, or those of us acting for sustainable development, it really doesn't matter whether we do it from international development agencies or governments or civil society, whatever it is, we have a mounting pile of crises one after the other. They are all interconnected. The worst thing that we can do is to try to tackle each of them in silos. We have a systemic crisis, and we need to, unfortunately, we have some supply side problems. A number of countries are cutting down on the commitments on international development. I think that's regrettable. That's not certainly what Spain wants to do. We see this, in this particular moment, as an investment. The world needs more cooperation, not less. There are a number of others. It's not just us. It's true that if you look at the top donors, there are a number of them that are cutting down their budgets. There are others, us, Korea, very diverse countries. Korea, Norway is still affirming their development cooperation. There is a lot, and I think the ambassador of the Gambia was alluding to it, a lot of South-to-South cooperation. There is a lot of knowledge circulating in countries in the so-called Global South or Plural South. All these blocks, by the way, I don't think are that homogeneous. There is a plural North and a plural South. There are those of us that are trying to build bridges, by the way. Just weeks ago, my Prime Minister wrote a joint letter about the value of international development cooperation, with the Prime Minister, with the President of South Africa and the President of Brazil. And I think we are going to see more and more of those alliances bridging North and South. I think the worst crisis, and that's really the big obstacle, is a crisis of trust. A trust on one another, a trust on the multilateral system. Kumi was alluding to multilateral negotiations. I've done a career in international development, but I had a long stint negotiating international text, and indeed, we do have an issue of credibility. We need a multilateral system that works. It can be further increase its fairness and democratic value, absolutely true, but it also needs to work in practice, and I think we need to move from words to action in a number of areas. We have a possibility now in Seville. We have the 4th conference on financing for sustainable development. What we do from international development cooperation is small, but we can unlock other resources. Trade, a trade system that is fairer, that it is more balanced, that benefits everyone. Taxation, absolutely important, and I think we have heard voices from civil society as well. We need a global fair taxation system, but we also need to work with our partner countries on increasing the tax flows. And again, I think to resolve this trust crisis, what we need is a change of narrative. I think the old aid system is dying, if not dead. We need to transition from a system based on aid to a system based on partnerships. None of our partner countries really want to be assisted or aid. What we want is to build mutually beneficial partnerships that are based on mutual respect, on mutual accountability, of course, on treating each other like adults. We can talk about values, we can talk about interests, and certainly if someone comes to talk to us, we will be talking about things like democracy, about women's rights, about human rights. That is not conditionality, not something that we are going to throw at people's heads. It's something that will be part of our conversation. And we need to talk about solidarity, and I want to underscore this word. Huh? Solidarity is important, and it's solidarity in everyone's benefit. Solidarity is not charity. Solidarity is understanding that many of the complex problems that we have, that we share, the climate crisis, the transition to a just and inclusive digital world, is something that we share, it's challenges that we share, and it's only through helping one another or working with one another, that is cooperation, is working together, we will be able to solve it. And again, that we live, in particular in Europe at the moment, there is a lot of talk about security. And I do want people like me that come from the progressive side of the political spectrum not to shy away from the concept of security. We need to own it. I think security is important, human security, the possibility for people to develop their own lives. And of course, security may mean in some contexts an investment in the capacities to including military capacities to avoid war or prevent war, but we need to invest in the humanitarian system that is on the brink of collapse. There are people dying as we talk about some of these budget cuts. I don't think the amount of media coverage that we have about tariffs, it doesn't equate to the amount of coverage that we have on the number of women that are dying because of unsafe childbirth that is happening now in the world. And we've done a lot of things together. And again, I mean, there can be a lot of criticism about international development cooperation, the very idea of aid, you name it. But I've been in Geneva meeting with some of our partners in the global health arena. Just to give one example, the Global Fund has prevented 65 million deaths from AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. We've done this together. This is what is being questioned now. Certainly the system needs reforms, massive reforms, and I think we are reforming ourselves, by the way. We are increasing our budgets, but we're also reforming our agency, again, with the idea of moving from aid to partnerships, to have these mutually beneficial relationships with our countries, our partner countries that we see as equals and as really close partners in Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, and so on. But we still need international cooperation, and I think that is very important. International development cooperation that is grounded on solidarity, but also on responsibility, because we are responsible for these common goods, and it's incumbent on all of us to work together to achieve them.
Thank you very much, Anton. And I think that you brought a value that has been discussing all over in all the presentation, that it's solidarity, from Asita's word at the welcoming to each of the different speakers. And I also would like to highlight, you mentioned you mentioned taxation. It was mentioned by our guest keynote speaker, and it was also mentioned by the ambassador of the Gambia, sort of the African Union support to the UN tax convention, and of course Yarati mentioned the issue of the tax to the super rich, that it was put in the G20 with the Brazilian presidency. But, as you said, I mean, we can unlock those resources, but the importance of development cooperation, it's critical. So, and again, solidarity seems to be at the key of that discussion. I'm going to move now to Bilal Jamoussi, the Deputy Director of the Telecommunication Standardization Bureau of the International Telecommunication Union. And again, I mean, we saw from the statements of in particular from the ambassador of the Gambia, he was very energetic, making a call for the necessary digital infrastructure, And so I would like to ask you, what are the challenges associated with the use of artificial intelligence and emerging technologies in advancing social development? How we make this link?
Great. Thank you very much, Magdalena, and thank you for inviting us to join you today. I think we meet again just a month ago. We had the meeting with the co-facilitators for preparing for the World Summit on Social Solidarity. And the question of AI, I think to address it, probably it's important to demystify it a bit. What is AI? What are the building blocks? When we talk about artificial intelligence, as an engineer, we kind of decompose it to say, okay, AI, you need lots of data. That's the premise of it. You need computing platforms, supercomputers, to be able to go through lots of data. And you have algorithms or machine learning that we call in engineering to really learn from that data and be able to help humans in various tasks. So if we look at those components and then look at the risks associated with artificial intelligence, one of the biggest challenges today is that the representation of the data. Because the accuracy of artificial intelligence and its representation depends on the data that it's working on. So if, for example, all of the data that's being harvested is English-based, you have a linguistic deficiency. If all the data is based on men, but not women, you have gender inequality in the accuracy of the artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth. This is what's referred to often as a data bias. So in order to address these structural risks with AI, one needs to look at the current connectivity in the world. We still have 2.6 billion people unconnected. And if you're not connected, your data is not being represented in the algorithms being used by artificial intelligence. So that's one area of work that we have to address. And that's one of the areas that the ITU is working on, is to connect the world, to ensure that people are connected so that their data is included in the conversation, but also so that they can make use of artificial intelligence in helping them with AI for health, for example. And we worked with WHO since 2018 on using health data in an anonymous way to be able to train algorithms and use your smartphone when you don't have a medical doctor or a nurse to be able to access immediate guidance on what sort of remedies, health remedies you might have. The other challenge with artificial intelligence is that you need data centers to host the data. You need massive computing platforms to be able to make use of that data and answer queries or responses. And not every country has access to data centers. Not every country has access to compute platforms. So that's the digital divide I think Professor Ka was referring to, that AI would accelerate and widen this digital divide if we don't look at the digital infrastructure that is necessary for AI. On the human rights aspect, since the Council resolution that kind of linked human rights and standards or digital, we have been working with our partners here in Geneva, the other standards organizations, ISO and IEC, to include the human rights lens in standards development, because usually standards development, especially in the digital space, is focused on interoperability. So your phone and my phone talk together, then there needs to be standards that governs that. So the interoperability is one of the key elements of standards development. The cost of the solution, the commercial or commercial viability of it, but in that process, the human rights lens was missing. And that's what we've been trying to add in the conversation around digital standards, is to include the possible uses of technology and how to ensure that there is inclusivity, there is representation, and there is also sensitivity on how the data or the digital solutions could be used or misused. So this is a bit painting the picture on the risks, but maybe if we have more time, I can talk about the opportunities and how AI could actually be used for good.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move to all the panelists, and I'm going to ask two questions in one. So I'm going to ask now the challenge to bring us to a positive, I mean, in this very challenging time, give us some hope. Where is the hope? What are the opportunities? And add to that a response on how, because we're a research institute and we're being hosted by a graduate institute, what is the role of research? So the hope, bring us the opportunities, and the role of the research in order to get there. Kumi, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. So I think what we need right now is hope that people can believe in. And what we need to do is create opportunities, multiple opportunities for people to be able to participate in ways that are diverse and different and multifaceted. Given the scale of the challenges that we face, we need to have the highest level of popular mobilization and participation that we need. And I would say that my hope comes from seeing that young people in large numbers around the world are not prepared to accept a broken status quo. And so what I would say is that we need to have a scale of participation that is joyful, that is community building, that builds social networks of substance and all of that, because we are facing a global mental health crisis right now as a result of eco-anxiety, climate anxiety, and the rise of fascism. But part of the response to that has to be that we need to recognize we need participation for two things. One, to put pressure on our political and business leaders to change faster than they're willing to, and on the other hand, as an antidote to despair and an antidote to sort of depression and so on. So this is a moment where we need to make sure that we have creative forms of participation, and I'm glad to see that that's on the rise in multiple places around the world. So that's where the hope is. In terms of research, I think, one of the things that is so frightening about what's coming out of the United States is that basically political leaders just tell the most outrageous lies and appear to get away with it. And so in this moment that we are in, we need to say that fact-based actions, fact-based activism, fact-based policy work is critically important. We cannot have, a weird calculation of what is a tariff and get various things confused and impose tariffs on some island where there's just penguins and tell us that this is what the most powerful country in the world can offer to us, okay? So I think research in this moment is critically important, but I would conclude by saying that the research needs to be rooted in the world of praxis. There's far too much of research that happens isolated from the people on the ground that are actually doing the work, and we need to have a much more engaged research processes where the people in the front lines of the issues that are impacting humanity's lives have voice and even have capability to contribute and shape what that research should look like. But to conclude, research and mobilization on the larger scale are equally critically necessary in the moment of history that we find ourselves in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kumi. When you were describing those creative activism, it's really gave me hope for those of us who has been on the street protesting for something, and those moments that are, there is moments of happiness, there's moment of joy, and I think that that is what we need. Janina, you go next. Hope and research.
Yeah, well, you are asking for hope and research, but I need to say something which is not hope, but the opposite, but I think it's important to put it on the table. I'm against magic formulas when talking about citizens' participation, and I think this is very important, particularly at the European Union level. Now there are some solutions, like, for instance, the citizens' assemblies, which are perceived as the ideal mechanism to produce democratic deliberation, but people doesn't know about that and is perceived as an expert-driven experiment. So I think it's important to recognize that the practices are rich and contextually related. So the problem is not that we don't have citizen participation. The problem is that when people demonstrate, it's not heard. We have many experiences all around the world, particularly in Latin America, as you may know, in Brazil, in Uruguay. And I'm not saying that this works perfectly, but I'm saying that top-down initiatives won't work. It never works. Again, we can quote Hirschman, but there's plenty of evidence that you can define a perfect policy and then you go to the field, and the field has its own dynamic and more rich variables and so on. So the hope is in what is already going on. I think the challenge here is how to capture and support that in place of expecting to create a magic formula to go and implement something. This will never work. And in terms of research, I fully agree with the previous speaker. I think research now, and particularly the academic sector, is perceived as part of the divide. We have a problem with the legitimacy of the scientific knowledge, and is perceived as technocratic and expertise elite-driven. So the narratives from which we are producing research and the co-production are central to, bring hope.
Certainly, and that I think stressed the point made by Kumi. Bilal, you promise us the opportunities with artificial intelligence, so give us hope and research.
Absolutely. Since 2017, we launched in the ITU something called the AI for Good. In fact, the building next door with the ITU, you find the big banner of this conference and movement, really. In 2017, we saw that AI has lots of promise to augment human capacity, not to replace it, but to just allow us to do things better and more accurately. And so we launched this AI for Good to see how we can use AI to accelerate achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And from those conversations in the various AI for Good summits, a number of focus groups were created where we have a multi-stakeholder group of government, private sector, civil society, researchers come together and focus on a particular topic. And since 2017, we launched maybe some 10 different focus groups. One on AI for health that I mentioned with WHO, and the group worked for like 5 years, bringing medical doctors and digital experts on identifying and benchmarking AI for health applications. And we have seen significant development there in harvesting the data, providing the nomenclature, providing the regulatory guidance, the ethical guidance of using data in healthcare settings, with both developed and developing countries participating in this focus group. And they published some 39 reports and open source code. And I think that could be the basis for further research as you embark on further research in AI. That's one example. We also had work with the Food and Agriculture Organization on using the Internet of Things, the drones, the sensors on the ground, to augment food production and combat the hunger SDG. And again, that focus group worked for a number of years and published all of these reports that are publicly available on our website and the FAO website. A third example for natural disaster management, and it's related to climate. There is lots of changes in the climate impacting floods, mudslides, etc. Many of them could be detected early by AI because you have satellite imaging, you have sensors on the ground, that data is fed, and we can have early warning to prevent lots of deaths and disaster, the impact of disasters. A fourth example is road safety. 1.3 million deaths on the road are due to car accidents. Autonomous and assisted driving and intelligent transportation system using artificial intelligence is already saving lives today. If you buy a new car, you have lots of assisted driving telling you that there is car on your left, there is potentially needing to brake faster. Eventually you will get even assisted driving where the car helps you to drive. And that's based on artificial intelligence. We had a focus group with UNECE and ITU looking at the data and the connectivity of the car. So these are all the hope spectrum where AI for good is a real helper to the whole society. In terms of research, I think the output from all of these focus groups and the research reports that have been published and that were built with a multi-stakeholder group are good foundation for further research on AI for good. And I will finish by inviting everyone to come to the AI for Good Summit in Geneva this year, 8 to 11 July. We will be in Palexpo because this topic has outgrown CICG. Well, last year we couldn't fit everyone. So this year we're going to CICG. We're expecting 15,000 participants. Several heads of states have confirmed. Many ministers from Global South and North are coming. The entire private sector landscape working on AI will be part of the conversation. Researchers, civil society. So it's really a unique, and 47 UN partners. So all of us in the UN system are partnering in the AI for Good. So I would love to see everyone continue the dialogue at the AI for Good and use it as a platform for global governance of AI. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anton, you have the last word. So we had the AI for good. How we can have the development for good?
Well, look, I'm an optimist, and the times are really challenging. But times of challenges, times of crisis are also times of opportunity. And let's face it, a lot of, and I think in the introductory speeches, some of the speakers were saying that a lot of what we see is not the cause of anything, but rather the consequence of some factors. And as I mentioned in my earlier intervention, we need to rethink many of the things that we have been working on for quite a while. We need to rethink even those successful parts of the multilateral system, like the global health architecture. WHO is reforming itself, the different instruments are reforming themselves. Development cooperation, as I said, we need a new narrative. We need to engage and talk differently and build with actors that before we were not talking to. So really, this year, 2025, is going to be very hard. It is being hard. It's being hard for all of us. It's being hard for academia. It's being hard for science. It's being hard for development cooperation. It's being hard for business that are being affected by tariffs and things that we wouldn't imagine would happen. But every action creates a reaction, and that will happen. That will happen. And I think going to data and science, I think it is fundamental. It's really part of this change that we need to see. I said before, development cooperation is not just about financing flows. I mean, we committed to 0.7. We are making steps towards that. It's true, the last 2 years, our government has not been able to pass a budget, but every budget we had, we increased the budget of our agency. We doubled our investment in development cooperation over the last 3 years. We are multiplying by 3 our investment in humanitarian aid. And I underline the word investment, because this is an investment with a return in terms of a more stable, safer world, not just for the communities and the people we work with, but also with our fellow citizens at home in Spain. And that's important. This is not just an act of charity, as I said. It's really in our interest in investing in these partnerships. But we need not just financial flows. We need knowledge. We need science. We need technology transfer. Talking about artificial intelligence, we are working with the Barcelona Supercomputing Center. That is one of Europe's main centers in artificial intelligence. We are trying to build a partnership with our Latin American partners so they can access some of the capacity, supercomputing capacity, and that we are able, for instance, to build foundational language that is not just in English. I'm speaking in English to you, but you know there is a strong bias in artificial intelligence in favor of English, you know, and there is quite a few 100 million people that speak Spanish and Portuguese, and by the way, many indigenous languages in Latin America. We want to really mobilize artificial intelligence in favor of that diversity and develop solutions, for instance, on disaster risk reduction. You know, we all agree. I mean, in Spain last year we suffered terrible floodings, like many people died. There is, by the way, a lot of knowledge on disaster preparedness that happens in the south. You know, I visited almost coincidentally 1 or 2 months afterwards. I visited the Philippines, where they experienced 6 typhoons. Nobody died. You know, there are much more ahead of us in terms of climate adaptation. You know, so how do we share all this knowledge in a circular way, all this data, all this research? Well, we need to do more, but certainly data, research, facts, and science are important. In the world of social media, though, I am afraid it is not enough. We need to develop narratives, and we really need to fight for people's hearts and minds to have them on the side of science, on the side of openness, solidarity, and cooperation. And really, I do think there is a majority of the world. I'm not going to count how many people live in the north and in the south, but I'm really, if we take a poll and we ask people, and by the way, many of the cuts that we are seeing in development cooperation in some developed countries have been done not on the back of a slide in popular support for development cooperation. There is no country in which you have seen a decline in polls that are being taken. In Spain, we have 80% of our fellow citizens that support what we do, even if that involves a cost, which it does, but it's a cost that is an investment. So I think we have people with us in terms of all these elements: science, economic openness, solidarity, cooperation. What we need is to mobilize it, and as I said, like to fight for people's hearts and minds. And someone mentioned communications. Sounds like maybe not a very ambitious thing. I would rather think about narratives, about talking about what we do. I think Kumi was mentioning, like, our families do not know what we work. That's certainly my case. But if I try to explain what I do, what the people that work with me do, is we channel the solidarity of the Spanish people. And that is a very important asset and something very important, very valuable in the world we live in, and we're very proud of doing so.
Thank you very much. At UNRISD, we ask the difficult questions and we research those difficult questions, and sometimes the answers take long. Thank you for your patience. We took a little bit more time than expected, and I would like a big applause for our panelists.